Chapter 33 of Barnaby Rudge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens. Chapter 33. One wintry evening, early in the year of our Lord 1780, a keen north wind arose as it grew dark, and night came on with black and dismal looks. A bitter storm of sleet, sharp, dense, and icy cold, swept the wet streets and rattled on the trembling windows. Signboards, shaken past endurance in their creaking frames, fell crashing on the pavement. Old tottering chimneys reeled and staggered in the blast, and many a steeple rocked again that night as though the earth were troubled. It was not a time for those who could by any means get light and warmth to brave the fury of the weather. In coffee houses of the better sort guests crowded round the fire, forgot to be political, and told each other with a secret gladness that the blast grew fiercer every minute. Each humble tavern by the waterside had its group of uncouth figures round the hearth, who talked of vessels foundering at sea and all hands lost, related many a dismal tale of shipwreck and drowned men, and hoped that some they knew were safe, and shook their heads in doubt. In private dwellings children clustered near the blaze, listening with timid pleasure to tales of ghosts and goblins, and tall figures clad in white standing by bedsides, and people who had gone to sleep in old churches, and being overlooked had found themselves alone there at the dead hour of the night, until they shuddered at the thought of the dark rooms upstairs, yet loved to hear the wind moan too, and hoped it would continue bravely. From time to time these happy indoor people stopped to listen, or one held up his finger and cried, "Hark!" And then, above the rumbling in the chimney and the fast pattering on the glass, was heard a wailing rushing sound, which shook the walls as though a giant's hand were on them, then a hoarse roar as if the sea had risen, then such a whirl and tumult that the air seemed mad, and then, with a lengthened howl, the waves of wind swept on and left a moment's interval of rest. Cheerily, though there were none abroad to see it, shone the Maypole light that evening. Blessings on the red, deep ruby glowing red old curtain of the window, blending into one rich stream of brightness, fire and candle, meat, drink, and company, and gleaming like a jovial eye upon the bleak waste out of doors. Within, what carpet like its crunching sand, what music merry as its crackling logs, what perfume like its kitchen's dainty breath, what weather genial as its hearty warmth. Blessings on the old house, how sturdily it stood! How did the vexed wind chafe and roar about its stalwart roof! How did it pant and strive with its wide chimneys, which still poured forth from their hospitable throats great clouds of smoke, and puffed defiance in its face! How, above all, did it drive and rattle at the casement, emulous to extinguish that cheerful glow which would not be put down, and seemed the brighter for the conflict. The profusion, too, the rich and lavish bounty of that goodly tavern! It was not enough that one fire roared and sparkled on its spacious hearth. In the tiles which paved and compassed it 500 flickering fires burnt brightly also. It was not enough that one red curtain shut the wild night out, and shed its cheerful influence on the room. In every saucepan lid and candlestick and vessel of copper, brass, or tin that hung upon the walls were countless ruddy hangings, flashing and gleaming with every motion of the blaze, and offering, let the eye wander where it might, interminable vistas of the same rich colour. The old oak wainscoting, the beams, the chairs, the seats, reflected it in a deep dull glimmer. There were fires and red curtains in the very eyes of the drinkers, in their buttons, in their liquor, in the pipes they smoked. Mr. Willet sat in what had been his accustomed place 5 years before, with his eyes on the eternal boiler, and had sat there since the clock struck 8, giving no other signs of life than breathing with a loud and constant snore, though he was wide awake, and from time to time putting his glass to his lips, or knocking the ashes out of his pipe and filling it anew. It was now 10:30. Mr. Cobb and Long Phil Parkes were his companions as of old, and for 2 mortal hours and a half none of the company had pronounced one word. Whether people, by dint of sitting together in the same place and the same relative positions, and doing exactly the same things for a great many years, acquire a sixth sense, or some unknown power of influencing each other which serves them in its stead, is a question for philosophy to settle. But certain it is that old John Willet, Mr. Parkes, and Mr. Cobb were one and all firmly of opinion that they were very jolly companions, rather choice spirits than otherwise, that they looked at each other every now and then as if there were a perpetual interchange of ideas going on among them, that no man considered himself or his neighbour by any means silent, and that each of them nodded occasionally when he caught the eye of another, as if he would say, "You have expressed yourself extremely well, sir, in relation to that sentiment, and I quite agree with you." The room was so very warm, the tobacco so very good, and the fire so very soothing, that Mr. Willet by degrees began to doze. But as he had perfectly acquired, by dint of long habit, the art of smoking in his sleep, and as his breathing was pretty much the same awake or asleep, saving that in the latter case he sometimes experienced a slight difficulty in respiration, such as a carpenter meets with when he is planing and comes to a knot, neither of his companions was aware of the circumstance until he met with one of these impediments and was obliged to try again. "Johnny's dropped off," said Mr. Parkes in a whisper. "Fast as a top," said Mr. Cobb. Neither of them said any more until Mr. Willet came to another knot, one of surpassing obduracy, which bade fair to throw him into convulsions, but which he got over at last without waking, by an effort quite superhuman. "He sleeps uncommon hard," said Mr. Cobb. Mr. Parkes, who was possibly a hard sleeper himself, replied with some disdain, "Not a bit in it," and directed his eyes towards a handbill pasted over the chimney-piece, which was decorated at the top with a woodcut representing a youth of tender years running away very fast, with a bundle over his shoulder at the end of a stick, and, to carry out the idea, a finger-post and a milestone beside him. Mr. Cobb likewise turned his eyes in the same direction, and surveyed the placard as if that were the first time he had ever beheld it. Now this was a document which Mr. Willet had himself indited on the disappearance of his son Joseph, acquainting the nobility and gentry and the public in general with the circumstances of his having left his home, describing his dress and appearance, and offering a reward of £5 to any person or persons who would pack him up and return him safely to the Maypole at Chigwell, or lodge him in any of His Majesty's jails until such time as his father should come and claim him. In this advertisement Mr. Willet had obstinately persisted, despite the advice and entreaties of his friends, in describing his son as a young boy, and furthermore as being from 18 inches to a couple of feet shorter than he really was, two circumstances which perhaps accounted in some degree for its never having been productive of any other effect than the transmission to Chigwell at various times, and at a vast expense, of some 45 runaways varying from 6 years old to 12. Mr. Cobb and Mr. Parkes looked mysteriously at this composition, at each other, and at old John. From the time he had pasted it up with his own hands, Mr. Willet had never by word or sign alluded to the subject or encouraged anyone else to do so. Nobody had the least notion what his thoughts or opinions were connected with it, whether he remembered it or forgot it, whether he had any idea that such an event had ever taken place. Therefore, even while he slept, no one ventured to refer to it in his presence, and for such sufficient reasons these his chosen friends were silent now. Mr. Willet had got by this time into such a complication of knots that it was perfectly clear he must wake or die. He chose the former alternative, and opened his eyes. "If he don't come in 5 minutes," said John, "I shall have supper without him." The antecedent of this pronoun had been mentioned for the last time at 8 o'clock. Messrs. Parkes and Cobb, being used to this style of conversation, replied without difficulty that to be sure Solomon was very late, and they wondered what had happened to detain him. "He ain't blown away, I suppose," said Parkes. "It's enough to carry a man of his figure off his legs, and easy too. Do you hear it? It blows great guns indeed. There'll be many a crash in the forest to-night, I reckon, and many a broken branch upon the ground to-morrow." "It won't break anything in the Maypole, I take it, sir," returned old John. "Let it try. I give it leave. What's that?" "The wind," cried Parkes. "It's howling like a Christian, and has been all night long." "Did you ever, sir," asked John, after a minute's contemplation, "hear the wind say Maypole?" "Why, what man